everything you do from then on is different.
One of the detectives, I think his name was
He was a
Derek.
golden boy.
And all we can do right now is come together.
Extreme domestic violence, multiple rapes.
We are so glad to have you here on Life Support. What we try to do during our time together is talk about trauma and suffering and mental illness, and we can all discover together how Jesus shows up in these situations and how we can learn more about him. And so I'm really, really excited to talk to our next guest. His name is Justin Jorgensen, and he's got quite a story to tell. He's very brave for being here. And Justin, thank you so much for dropping by. Appreciate it so much.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
So you are a local guy, right? Where do you live? We record this show in Minneapolis. So whereabouts do you live in the Twin Cities?
I live in Prior Lake,
which is a beautiful community about 25, 30 minutes south of Minneapolis, maybe, southwest.
Yeah.
And you've lived there your whole life in Prior Lake?
No, I've been all over. I lived in Montana, I lived in Bemidji, lived in downtown Minneapolis, and lived here in Prior Lake as well.
Okay. So let's talk about the beginnings of your story. And you talked about living in different places, and this story starts when you were really young. And one of the striking things about it when I was kind of reading through your story is how young you were when things began to develop. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about where you grew up and when some of these mental illness things began to be noticed by you and how you began to deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like you said, it was very early. I developed depression as a youngster, and I think the first time that I really felt like I was depressed, even though I couldn't put it in words that was what I was feeling, was in the first grade. Shortly after that, it was around maybe third or fourth grade, probably third grade, that I had my first suicidal ideations, which is, just thinking about suicide, and thinking how I would do it, and thinking through that whole process of what that would be like. And it just seemed like the natural thing to do. I couldn't elaborate on my pain because I was young. And so a lot of my depression came out as somatic symptoms, which means that I was feeling physical pain as a result of the mental anguish. And like I said, when I was really young, I started having some suicidal thoughts, and they stayed with me up until just a few years ago. So, yeah, it was very early.
Yeah, I can already hear parents saying to themselves, what? First grade? Because we look at these innocent kids that live in our homes and we think, well, they look fine. Did anybody else have an understanding, do you remember back then, of what you were going through, or did you basically have to kind of go through this on your own?
Yeah, I went through my mental health struggles on my own up until my senior year in high school, even past the senior year. It was a solitary journey. It's not that people didn't care or wouldn't have cared if they had known. I didn't know how to ask for help. And one problem with the somatization, having the somatic symptoms, is that it doesn't come out across as depression unless you know it, unless you know that you're looking for those sort of things.
You're basically being diagnosed physically.
Yeah.
But the mental part is being missed likely because they're trying to figure out what's wrong with your body.
Absolutely, yeah.
And again, that's something that probably most parents don't think of first. They think of, it's always physical, and a child this young couldn't really have that. And I would guess at that age you don't even really know how to articulate how you're feeling, huh?
No, I did not. I didn't know. Even as a high schooler, there was difficulty knowing how to express what I was feeling. Like I would walk into high school and I would feel like a weight of bricks had fallen on my shoulders as I walked into the school, and that is, to me, seems like classic, maybe anxiety, but definitely some depression associated with the school. And I got in a lot of trouble too. I really pushed it from seventh grade on because I was looking for a way to feel better, and it kind of helped to get in trouble.
Yeah. And part of your story is that you grew up in a home that you had lots of foster kids, right, coming in and out of your home, Christian family.
Mm-hmm.
So did that further isolate you, having that much activity in your home? Or as you look back, what kind of effect do you think that might have had?
Yeah, it would be really simple to say that I can blame my depression on having kids moving in and out through the home, or that we had foster kids that were the same age as us pretty consistently. And so as I got older, the kids were more and more disturbed. And I had a couple really scary kids that were living with me, and then after these kids, my parents were kind of like, okay, we're done. We can't do this anymore. Things are getting too heavy. But yeah, I think having foster kids wasn't helpful because there were short relationships. So you'd meet someone, you'd become friends with them, and then they'd be gone. And then also the fact that these kids came from troubled homes. But, I can't be like, I blame it on my parents, or I blame it on the foster kids, or anything like that, because I think there was probably a predisposition to mental illness, and then a bunch of things made it worse.
Yeah, and we don't want to discourage people from doing foster care. It's just a really interesting kind of a setup that you had to live with there. It's not a normal kind of a family setup. So what do you remember back when this all first began in your elementary years and junior high, middle school? Did the church have any part in this for you? Was that a safe place for you, or was it just kind of disconnected from what you were feeling inside?
I always felt pretty happy in church. It was a good place. It was safe. I had friends, people that I cared for deeply. We had good, caring adults who were part of my life as church members. So yeah, I mean, church was great. But I don't know, maybe I'm jumping the gun just a little bit here, but I don't think the church really had an opportunity or could have done anything different to help me. Mm-hmm. There's things that are great that church can do, like just being aware of mental illness and destigmatizing it, making it normalizing it. But there's also, things were really different in the 80s and 90s as far as mental health goes. And so for the church to have specifically tried to take action at that time would have been bizarre, because mental health wasn't as prominent as it is now.
Yeah, and we are going to talk about that before we're finished, and that because I know that you have feelings about a pastoral role in mental health, and I happen to agree with your point of view on that, so we want to make sure we get to that as we go along. Okay, let's go back now to you're developing this depression starting to happen. It's affecting your body. You mentioned in 7th grade you started to act out. What did that look like in your life?
Well, I guess the cause of it, first off, was that I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy and fly planes, but it wasn't in the cards. My eyes weren't good enough, and I wasn't getting good enough grades to go to the Air Force Academy. And so I decided, well, I see these kids who get in trouble getting attention, and they seem to kind of enjoy getting in trouble. And I made a very cognizant decision, a very thought out decision to start getting in trouble. And I just started getting in trouble, and pretty soon I was doing everything that I could to get kicked out of class. I would talk during class, I would talk with friends, I would throw stuff. And eventually I got kicked out of class so much that they just put a chair out in the hallway for me to do class. It didn't, I mean, I suppose it hindered me academically, but it wasn't, I still passed my classes. And so that wasn't really an issue. But yeah, I mean, in 7th grade, I just said, I'm going to do everything I can to get in trouble. I'm not going to do anything really major. I'm not going to beat kids up or anything like that, but I'm going to talk, and I'm going to throw food and just get in as much trouble as I can and push the envelope as far to the edge as I can, and then see what happens.
Now, was that a way of getting attention? Was it a way of numbing the pain or shoving it kind of off to the side?
Yeah, it was numbing the pain. Like, I hurt so bad at that time that I just wanted to feel something different, and it was kind of a rush. It was kind of made the pain go away a little bit. So yeah, it just I don't know. I don't know beyond that. Beyond numbing the pain and as a way to get attention and just kind of feel, because I guess I had kind of blunted emotions. So my emotions, I just hurt, but I didn't really feel a lot of other things. So it was just kind of a matter of feeling something.
Yeah, and that's a good practical takeaway already in your story, is that if you have a child, neighbor child at church who's acting out, don't just assume, so often you hear the terms, oh, he's a bad kid, or she's she's just a bad influence, or whatever. There might be something underneath the surface that's going on there that you have no idea. So number one, have grace, and number two, seek help maybe for that child. Yeah,
I'm really actually glad that you mentioned that, because that's the thing is like, if someone would have noticed, if someone would have said, here's a kid who's a great kid, not ever getting in trouble, gets decent grades, and then all of a sudden there's this shift, this change, I feel like maybe someone should have noticed.
But again, it was the 80s and 90s, so it was a different world back then. Hopefully we've made some progress in that. By the way, we're talking with Justin Jorgensen, who's our guest here on Life Support, and it's a great Minnesota name, by the way, I've got to say. We like Johnsons, Jorgensens, Andersons, and the like here in Minnesota. So he is talking to us about some of his struggle early on with mental health, and thank you for sharing all of this. So now you're moving through your middle school years, you're into high school. What was changing? Anything? Or when did this really start to become really a problem where you began to grapple with some heavier issues?
Well, let's see. So high school happened, and I had some good years in high school. I felt pretty good. I was in sports, and there were a couple good years there. And then I guess what happened was I was teased a little bit, and teased by my friends. And it wasn't necessarily real significant, but that really bothered me. And so at one point I was just like, okay, so I'm getting teased, I'm going to throw food. And so I started throwing food in the lunchroom, and I threw food at teachers. That was my favorite thing. So, or I would throw food at someone who was teasing me or whatever. And, here again, we have kind of an escalation in the symptoms, as symptoms being acting out. And so I was just trying to feel better about myself. And then I started really pushing it in, and I basically got kicked out of all my honors classes. And over my 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, it kind of progressed. But by my senior year, I had like 110 days of in-school suspension. I think there's like 200 and some days that you go to school. So I didn't spend much time in class. I was mostly sitting in the detention room, being punished for misbehavior. And they decided Justin can't contain himself in the lunchroom, so we're going to just not let him go to the lunchroom. He has to eat it in the detention room. And, there were drugs, but it wasn't really super major. I mean, but the drugs were just kind of like a symptom again, of just not really caring and doing whatever.
And I would imagine all that time away from your classmates and in the detention hall probably maybe added to your anxiety and depression and how you felt about yourself and all those things?
Yeah, I felt actually better when I was in the detention room. There weren't people around. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to worry about the angst that I felt. Yeah, so it was interesting.
And where was God in this whole thing at that point in your life?
God was there. I wasn't real, there's so much going on. I wasn't really focused on church or church activities or anything. I didn't really have any moments where I was like, yeah, that's God speaking to me. I need to listen to him and like figure this out, because I was too busy just trying to survive.
Yeah. So you finish high school, and then what happens?
So over my senior year, real early in my senior year, in October or so, I started to develop symptoms of bipolar 1. And over the year, I developed these delusions. I started having major hallucinations. And so like I would have these hallucinations that were part of a delusional complex where I believed things about the world that weren't real, that weren't true. And I would experience them as in a hallucination. And so then I went to college. I went to college in Missoula, Montana, and I don't know how I survived, to be honest with you. People have commented that, that is really evident that God was watching over me during this time, because I was like, I was dangerous to myself because of the it's just like meeting random people and going to their house, or just things that I could have gotten hurt and I didn't. And so looking back, I really see God protecting me during this time. And as I think about it, I mean, there was never really any lots of dangerous things, but never anything that actually turned out me getting hurt.
So in the midst of all this struggle, God was still, as you look back now, had his hand on you and your life, guiding you through this. Yeah,
God has been there in my life in varying degrees. And it's actually pretty profound to think that I've survived this long, all the suicide attempts, all the dangerous activities that I was doing in college, and it's pretty amazing. After I came back from Montana, on winter break, I'll give you just a couple of examples of the things I was doing. I went downtown, and I was so out of it that I accidentally drove up 394 the wrong way. You know how it dumps into Minneapolis? I went the wrong way, and I was fortunate enough to not get hit by a car. I had this delusion that I had a different part of me, like a spirit part, that would go around and hunt demons. And so I'm at one point headed out to Montana, and I drove straight through 24 hours. And as I'm coming into the middle part of Montana, I saw the world end. And so I'm like driving along, watching this hallucination in my brain play out, and these angels and demons fighting, and I'm driving along 70, 80, 90 miles an hour, and somehow I managed to get there, get to Missoula without driving off the road.
Wow, that's amazing. And I want to pick that up next time we're together, because that's a fascinating way to end, but I know there's a story of redemption in there too. So
there is.
Yeah. Justin, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it so very much. What Justin is voicing is what we know from Scripture, that, the Lord will never leave us or forsake us. And so if you are struggling with mental health, number one, God is with you. Number two, reach out for help. Don't try to do this on your own. We've talked about the 80s and 90s. We're in 2020. There are resources available to you. So please don't be afraid to get help. But we'll talk more with Justin next time we get together as well. This is Life Support. So glad you joined us. We want to thank our partners, Faith Radio, Five Stone Media, and Ridgewood Church. On Faith Radio, you can access that network at myfaithradio.com. Here at the church, Ridgewood Church, myrwc.org/life support, and you can find this in video form on fivestonemedia.com. Love to see you on Twitter at Pastor Paul J. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next time here on Life Support.